She answered a call in French, even though she wasn't supposed to. A millionaire overheard her. And in that exact moment, something completely unexpected happened. Something that would change the course of her life forever. A call that seemed insignificant. A language she learned just for the love of it. And a man, someone she never imagined would cross into her world, ended up being the one who changed everything. June wasn't born in Paris, but her name gives off the feeling of someone who belongs in a place filled with sunshine, dreams, and way too much beautiful fashion. She grew up in a dusty town in Mississippi, where fashion simply meant wearing whatever was still intact and still fit. June's mother was a French woman who worked as a seamstress out of an old garage. On the wall, she'd taped up a faded photo of the Eiffel Tower, held there with worn-out Scotch tape, like a memory that refused to fade of a life she once had, or maybe just dreamed of. The only real thing in their house that actually came from France was an old silk scarf, its edges frayed, with a single word embroidered in one corner. Dream. June loved that scarf with everything she didn't know how to name. At 14, she started teaching herself French through old YouTube videos. Late at night, when her mother's sewing machine finally stopped, she'd sit under the tired yellow light, repeating greetings, introductions, grammar rules, not knowing when or if she'd ever use them. But for her, speaking French was a way to hold on to something beautiful, and a way to believe that maybe she belonged somewhere else, somewhere higher, somewhere farther. She once dreamed of becoming a designer. Not the kind who walks runways beside models and champagne, but someone who could make an ordinary person, slipping into one of her dresses, feel beautiful and worth something. June's mother understood that dream, so she never stood in the way. She only gave her daughter one piece of advice. If you want to make it to Paris, you have to learn how to stand on your own. But sometimes, life only needs one afternoon to take everything away. June's mother died in a truck accident on her way to the fabric store. June had just turned 18. She had to leave it all behind. School, dreams, and her entire youth. She left her hometown for Chicago with just two things: a torn canvas bag and the Rêve scarf tucked safely inside her bra. After countless failures, she finally landed a job at a 5-star hotel, not for the paycheck, but because she wanted to see the people who lived in the world she'd only ever seen on screen. Designer clothes, confident strides, conversations where every word felt like a precious stone. June didn't resent them. She watched, she remembered, she learned. Every day as she cleaned rooms, she imagined herself backstage at a fashion show. When she changed the sheets, she pictured them as high-end silk. When she folded guests' pajamas, she studied the seams, the fabric, the color choices. Each night in her cramped apartment, she pulled out old newspapers to cut patterns, stitching with leftover thread she'd picked up. Her hands, once used to unpicking her mother's worn shirts, were slowly learning the cuts of a dream. June wasn't some naive girl. She'd been looked down on. She'd been called low class. She'd heard the whispers from guests when they caught her mimicking French pronunciation in the elevator. But she never reacted. She just smiled, the kind of smile her mother taught her. Smile like you know you're exactly where you belong, even if the whole world thinks otherwise. Then one day, a day that felt no different from any other, everything suddenly shifted because of a phone call. The front desk was unattended. The phone kept ringing. June was wiping down a table nearby. Technically, she wasn't allowed to answer. But the phone rang a fourth time, and out of reflex, she picked it up. A man's voice came through the line. Crisp, proper French, firm, a little annoyed. Without thinking, June responded in French. Her voice was soft, precise, fluent, enough to make the other end of the line go silent for a few seconds. Qui êtes-vous? The man asked. Who are you? June froze. Her hand tightened around the sleeve she was holding. Part of her wanted to hang up, but another part whispered, just answer. She said quietly, Je suis juste une rêveuse. I'm just a dreamer. She set the phone down, her heart pounding like a drum. And on the other end, a man who had long believed no one in this world still listened with their heart, stood frozen, staring at the phone, as if he'd just heard a voice from a world he had locked away long ago. After hanging up, June stood still for a long moment, as if her hands had just touched a world she wasn't meant to belong to. The table was still wet. and the cleaning cloth had slipped to the floor. She hadn't noticed when. Her heart hadn't settled back into place yet. Partly from the shock, but mostly because of that voice. Flawless French, cold, deep, like a symphony cut off mid-performance. June bent down to pick up the cloth, trying to act like nothing happened. But minutes later, she heard hurried footsteps and the sharp sound of leather shoes hitting marble, the sound she'd learned to recognize as management. A front desk staffer had returned, panting, and whispered something into the head manager's ear. His expression darkened immediately, eyes scanning the lobby. Did someone answer the phone without being assigned to the desk? He barked. The other staff glanced at each other, shaking their heads. June stayed silent. She knew if she owned up, she'd be reprimanded, maybe even fired. But strangely, something stronger than fear held her in place. Curiosity. The manager turned to the receptionist and lowered his voice. VIP guest in room 1901. He's asking for the person who spoke to him in French. His tone dropped even more. He's never initiated a conversation with anyone in this hotel before. Something weird is going on. June stood nearby like a shadow. She had no idea why that man reacted so strongly, but her gut told her. This wasn't just a phone call. Room 1901 was the presidential suite, reserved only for people with real power. She'd overheard a few coworkers whispering. It was currently occupied by Gabriel Durand, one of the wealthiest names in New York real estate, known for being distant and practically silent. Rumor had it, he once had an entire front desk staff fired for knocking on his door the wrong way. June knew a man like him would never ask to find the person he spoke to, unless that person made him feel something different. The next day, an internal memo went out to all staff. Do not approach the guest in room 1901 unless explicitly instructed. No one understood why. But after that call, the 19th floor suddenly came under tighter control. Even a security guard was stationed there. It only fueled more curiosity. June quietly shifted her shift schedule to work on a lower floor for a few days. She pulled herself out of the orbit of everyone else's curiosity, avoiding eye contact, dodging questions. She worked more carefully, smiled less, and every time she passed the front desk, her heart would race, like the phone might ring again. But it didn't. Instead, on the third day, something else happened. June was wiping down the mirror in the conference room when she noticed a female guest had left her wallet behind. She hurried out to the lobby, hoping to return it in time. Just as she passed the row of sofas near the bar, wallet in hand, a voice called out behind her. You. The voice was deep in English, but there was something different about it. Slow, clear, and heavy with intent. She turned. A man in a black suit, no tie, leaned casually against the wooden bar, an espresso in hand. His face was sharply defined, almost sculpted. Gray eyes. A male assistant stood beside him. Everything around seemed to slow. She didn't need to ask. She knew. It was the man on the other end of the line. Gabriel Durand. June held her breath. He stepped forward slightly, his gaze narrowing. Do you work on the 19th floor? He shook his head. You speak French? She didn't answer. Her hand gripped the wallet tighter, index finger trembling slightly. He didn't press. He didn't need to. His eyes narrowed for a split second, like he was snapping the last piece into a puzzle. Then, without warning, Gabriel turned to his assistant. Get me the list of front desk staff from 3 days ago. The words sliced through her like scissors through fabric. June lowered her head and walked away without looking back. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window of her tiny apartment, her old-fashioned notebook open on her lap. The one filled with sketches and stitched dreams. But for the first time, she didn't write a design, a note, or a color code. She turned to a blank page and wrote just one line. Some voices aren't meant to be answered, unless you're ready to keep going. The next day, the hotel held a major event that called for a full-scale cleanup. June was assigned to help on the VIP floors, but no one could have predicted what would happen. While collecting laundry on the 19th floor, she accidentally dropped her old silk scarf, the one with Revere embroidered in the corner. The only thing she had left from her mother, from her old dream, from the person she used to be, and the one who picked it up was none other than Gabriel. He bent down, picked up the scarf, and studied the stitching closely. Revere, he said slowly. Do you know what it means? June nodded slightly, standing still. Gabriel looked at her for a long time, a very long time. This scarf doesn't belong to a regular housekeeper. June still said nothing, but in her eyes there was something that made him pause, something money couldn't buy, something fame couldn't demand, trust. And no one knew it yet, but in that moment, something big had started to shift. Gabriel Durand placed the silk scarf back into June's hand, then walked away without another word. But the look he gave her before turning left her feeling like she'd just been thrown under a spotlight. No place to hide, no way to pretend to be ordinary anymore. From that day on, June was reassigned to the lower floors. No one said why, no official warning was given, but she knew exactly what was happening. And the surprising part, she wasn't fired, just stepped back. For her, that felt like a win, because someone like Gabriel Durand, if he wanted to, could have the hotel change managers, not just a housekeeper's schedule. The days that followed passed quietly. June did everything by the book, stayed out of sight, but what had happened couldn't be undone. The 19th floor was like a cloud she had once touched, just once, and only with a small silk scarf. 3 days later, while June was cleaning the east lobby, the hotel's landline rang. The front desk picked up, listened, then turned to her. "Mr. Durand is requesting an espresso. From you, only you." June froze. She had no idea why someone like him would call personally, remember her, and request that she, a housekeeper, bring him coffee. She stepped into the elevator with the espresso tray, wearing white gloves, her thoughts tangled. The door to room 1901 opened before she could even knock. Gabriel stood inside, no jacket, hands in his pockets, soft light casting across half his face. The room was so still it felt like sound didn't exist, except for the pounding of June's heart. "Thank you," he said, taking the tray and setting it on the table. Then he turned to her and asked in French, "That day, why did you answer me like that?" June wasn't sure if she should respond, but his voice didn't have the usual cold edge. It was slower, tired, and carried something fragile, something he seemed to be trying very hard to hide. She replied, also in French, "Because you asked who I was, and that was the most honest answer I had." Gabriel's mouth curved slightly, something close to a smile, but not quite enough to be called one. Maybe he'd forgotten how to smile. He sat down in the chair, slowly turning the espresso cup in his hand, eyes never leaving her. "I've never heard anyone in this hotel speak to me in French," he said. "And never a housekeeper who speaks it like a native Parisian." June stayed still. She couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a test. Gabriel continued, as if reading her thoughts. "I don't mean it as an insult. Quite the opposite. I'm curious." June nodded slightly, then answered in English, her voice quiet but clear. "I learned online, and from my mother." Gabriel went silent. The word mother shifted something in his expression, like someone had touched a memory he'd kept locked up for years. "She was French?" he asked. June nodded. "She wasn't rich, but she taught me that if you still have dreams, don't let being poor twist the way you see the world." Gabriel leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a few seconds. When he opened them, his gaze had changed. It wasn't the look of a man sizing someone up anymore. It was the look of someone remembering who he used to be. "I lost my mother when I was 12, he said. "She left me in New York and went back to France. I never forgave her for that." June didn't react. There was no judgment in her eyes, only the kind of silence that listens. Gabriel rested his elbows on the table, staring out the window. "I always thought French was the language of abandonment, until the day you said, 'You're just someone who likes to dream.'" June lifted her head. For the first time, she looked him straight in the eye. Gabriel turned to her and asked, "Do you still dream?" That question, it wasn't a test. It sounded like a plea. June took a deep breath, then nodded. "I dream every day, but I don't wait for night to do it." The room went quiet. Then Gabriel let out a soft laugh, not loud, but enough to shift the air between them. It was a sound that felt foreign, even to him. "You're the first person to make me laugh," he said quietly. "In 3 years." June didn't know what to say, but she knew. In that moment, both of them had stepped out of the roles they usually played. Gabriel pulled a sheet of paper from a drawer and slid it toward her. "This is a ticket to a private fashion event next week. Here." He paused, then added, "I think you should see it." June looked at the ticket, then looked at him. Not because she doubted him, but because she'd never imagined that a single sentence in French could lead her into the story of a man who didn't know how to smile. But now, she wasn't just the girl who cleaned rooms anymore. She was the one who had stirred something awake in the heart of someone who thought he had nothing left to lose. June didn't go to the event that night. She folded the ticket and tucked it into the middle of her notebook, the one filled with fading pencil sketches of designs. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew that place wasn't hers yet. The people walking those red carpets didn't know what it was like to wipe up spilled coffee at 3 a.m. or scrape their knees against cold marble floors just to polish a baseboard. She wasn't angry at herself. She just knew she needed a little more time. Gabriel didn't call again, didn't mention the meeting. He slipped back into his usual rhythm, private dining, no conversation with anyone. But after that day, June felt something had shifted in the hotel. It wasn't the air. It was the way people looked at her. Some staff started whispering about the cleaning girl the VIP invited to a fashion event. Some smirked, some judged, some just watched quietly. June kept doing her job like always, but when she met their eyes, she found herself standing a little straighter. She went on with the routine, brushing shoulders with hundreds of guests, walking past thousands of luxury items. But no one made her heart skip the way it had in room 1901. And slowly, a question began to form. If that phone call had never happened, if the ticket hadn't been handed to her, if that dreamy French phrase had stayed locked in her mouth, would she have ever seen Gabriel any differently? Then one afternoon, as the season's first breeze swept through the long hallway of the 17th floor, June hurriedly pushed a cart of soiled linens back to storage. The side pocket of her apron came loose. In the scramble to catch a few small items from falling, she didn't notice she'd dropped the one thing that mattered most: the reverse silk scarf her mother had left her. She didn't realize it right away. Not until she got back to the laundry room, opened the personal items pouch to hand wash a few things, and froze. The scarf was gone. Her heart sank. Not because of its material value, but because it was the last thread tied to the days when she was just a little girl, sitting by a sewing machine, listening to her mother hum in French. She rushed back to the 17th floor, retracing every step, checking the hallway, the restroom, the side laundry station, even the elevator car. Nothing. No one had turned it in. No one had seen it. She knew it was gone. But what hit her hardest wasn't the loss itself. It was that no one ever warns you how much it hurts to lose a piece of your memory, especially the kind that stitched you together. 3 days later, the hotel hosted a private business gala, an event reserved strictly for high-level figures in the financial world. Lower-level staff like June weren't allowed anywhere near the gathering, except to clean up before and after. She was assigned to collect table linens and check the private lounges on the 20th floor, a floor reserved for VIPs only. No cameras, no noise, no unnecessary presence. June worked with precision, every movement deliberate. When she stepped out of the last lounge, just as she was closing the door behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. "You dropped this." She turned around. Gabriel was standing there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding out her scarf, neatly folded. June froze, not because he'd appeared without warning, but because of the scarf, pressed smooth, folded exactly the way her mother used to do it. She stepped forward, ready to speak, but Gabriel spoke first. "I found it on the 17th floor. One look, and I knew it wasn't designer." June nodded, taking it from him. She didn't smile, didn't thank him right away. She just looked at him, for the first time, not through the lens of status, not through wary distance, but simply as one person speaking to another who'd also lost something that mattered. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "It's all the memory I have left." Gabriel gave a small nod. He didn't ask anything more, but he didn't leave either. June shifted slightly, about to step aside, but then Gabriel met her gaze, unguarded for the first time. "I used to think memory only made people weak." She stayed quiet. "But I was wrong," he said. He paused, then added slowly, "I kept this scarf for 3 days. Not because I was curious, but because I didn't know why. I didn't want to let it go." June looked at him, a strange feeling curling in her chest, light and tight all at once. She had never heard a man speak about memory like it was something vital, something that kept a person alive. "Maybe," she said softly, "memory only feels weak to those who aren't brave enough to face it." Gabriel gave a quiet smile, small but real, and somehow, just for her. "I've been to a lot of places, met a lot of people," he said, "but you're the only one who's made me question myself." She didn't have time to reply. A staff member stepped out from the next room, calling her back to the cleanup crew. June nodded, turned to Gabriel, gave a small respectful bow, and walked away. As the door closed behind her, Gabriel remained where he was, hands in his pockets, eyes no longer sharp and distant, but softened, like he was trying to hold on to something fleeting, a feeling he once believed wasn't real. And June, stepping into the next room, still felt unsteady. Not because of the scarf, but because of that look. That look didn't see her as a housekeeper, not as a stranger in a five-star hotel, but as someone who'd finally been seen. June didn't know when it started, when Gabriel's eyes began showing up in her memories so often. Not in the naive, daydreamy way of a young woman staring up at a rich man. No, it was quieter, deeper. The kind of gaze that lingers not because it dazzles, but because it's the gaze of someone so used to silence, that the moment another presence enters it, even by accident, it leaves a mark. In the days after that brief encounter, they didn't speak again. Gabriel left no messages, made no calls to the front desk, didn't request coffee like before. But June could feel him, his presence, every time she stepped into the hallway on the 19th floor, as if there was a thin, invisible thread between them, stretching from the moment that silk scarf touched the floor, pulled taut, but never quite drawn in. June continued with her daily routines, but after that day, something shifted. She changed her habits, started cleaning on her own rhythm, adjusting her schedule to avoid crossing paths with Gabriel. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't sure she had the strength to pretend nothing had changed if she saw that look in his eyes again. Gabriel, on the other side of it all, slipped back into his usual armor, cold, distant. VIP staff still whispered about how he never made eye contact, gave clipped orders, never smiled. But June knew that wasn't the whole story. She was the only one who had seen him hesitate, the only one who had heard him speak about his mother, the only one who had caught that look, the one that wouldn't let go of a poor woman's scarf long after she was gone. One day, while changing sheets in a double room on the 18th floor, June accidentally dropped her small notebook. It opened on the floor, revealing sketch after sketch, dresses drawn in pencil, colors paired with fabric scraps taped beside them. She bent down to pick it up and froze for a moment, because suddenly she saw it clearly. For years, she'd been tiptoeing through the world built by other people, trying not to make noise, trying not to leave a trace. As if the moment someone discovered she was still dreaming, they would laugh, or worse, pity her. June hated being pitied. That afternoon, after her shift ended, she stayed behind alone in the laundry room. Surrounded by white tablecloths and the hum of silence, she reopened her notebook. And for the first time, she sketched a design inspired by Gabriel. Not a suit, a long coat, structured shoulders, high collar, pale gray, but the seams, soft like memory. A piece meant for someone who hides himself from the world, yet quietly hopes someone might still understand the language stitched beneath the surface. 1 week later, Gabriel came back. This time it wasn't in a hallway. It wasn't by chance. He came to the laundry room, a place no one from his world would ever willingly go. June was folding towels. She looked up and froze. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a charcoal turtleneck, dark gray trousers, no assistant, no CEO posture. Just a man who had come to say something. "I know I shouldn't be down here," he said, voice low, eyes fixed on the old wooden table. "But I didn't want to talk to you in a hallway, out there. We're not real." June finished folding the last towel, said nothing. Gabriel looked at her, this time, for a long moment. "I used to believe the distance between me and the world was necessary. I built it, I lived in it. But then a housekeeper answered me in French, and suddenly, the walls didn't feel safe anymore." June stayed quiet, not because she was shy, but because some words need a few seconds to fully land. Gabriel stepped forward and placed a small book on the table. A limited edition fashion anthology from France, leather-bound, its pages filled with the iconic visions of legendary designers. "I bought it thinking I'd give it to someone who deserved it," he said. "I didn't think it would be you. Not until I saw your notebook." June froze. "You read it?" "I didn't mean to," he replied. "It fell from your cart the day you passed by the 19th floor." She bit her lip, her eyes landing on the cover of the book, not because of its price, but because no one had ever acknowledged that her dream might be real. "Thank you," she whispered. Gabriel nodded, turned, and started walking toward the door. But just as his hand touched the handle, he stopped. "June." She looked up. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, "that two people from completely different worlds might still end up in the same story?" That question didn't need an answer, but the way she looked at him, unguarded, for the first time, was enough. It left the door open. As it closed behind him, June looked down at her hands. In them was the heavy book. Weighty, real. Proof of something she hadn't dared believe. Maybe, just maybe, her dream wasn't standing alone anymore. A week after that conversation in the laundry room, June felt the silence return. But this time it was heavier, thicker. Gabriel had vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. No more messages, no more unexpected gifts, no more glances in the hallway of the 19th floor. Whatever thread had begun to form between them was now cleanly, quietly cut. At first, she thought he was just busy. Then days passed. Whispers started spreading. Someone in security mentioned reporters were swarming the building. An internal article began circulating. Gabriel Durand was under financial investigation. The details were vague, unconfirmed, but the tension in the hotel thickened overnight. VIP guests were monitored more closely. Staff had to sign additional confidentiality agreements. No one dared mention Durand's name anymore. June heard the news while changing the curtains in a guest room on the 6th floor. Her hand froze midair. The soft fabric slipped through her fingers. She didn't say anything, just nodded, thanked her coworker, and kept working as usual. But in her mind, she knew something had ended. Not gently. No goodbye. No explanation. That afternoon, June walked a slow circle around the hotel, trying to steady herself. She told herself, "He doesn't owe me anything. I'm just the housekeeper." But logic never wins against that hollow kind of disappointment. She sat alone in the laundry room and opened her design notebook. The coat inspired by Gabriel was still there, unfinished. She picked up her pencil, ready to draw the final line. But her hand stopped. Everything felt unfinished now, including her. The next morning, during her early shift, June was called to HR. The manager didn't soften the blow. "We've received reports that you violated protocol for guest interaction on the VIP floor. You had private contact with Mr. Durand, exchanged personal items, and were present in restricted areas without authorization." June stayed silent. They weren't wrong. But the way they said it, like it was dirty, like it meant something else, made it feel far worse than the truth. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" the manager asked, hand resting on the open file. "No," June replied, eyes steady. "I just want to leave now instead of waiting until the end of the month." The manager nodded, expressionless. The paperwork was signed quickly. No questions, no hesitation, no reason to stay. June packed in silence, one old canvas bag, a few uniforms, the silk scarf neatly folded, her design notebook tucked deep at the bottom. She walked the hallway one last time. Her eyes stayed dry, but her heart cracked with every step. She walked out of the hotel without looking back. That night, alone in her tiny room on the outskirts of the city, June lay on her back, staring at the ceiling like always. She opened her notebook, flipped to the last page, blank. No sketches, no notes. Just a single line in the corner. "Memory doesn't make you weak. Denying it does." She closed the book, then stood up. Took a blank sheet of paper, picked up a pen, and wrote a letter by hand. Short, precise. Each word drawn with care. "To Gabriel, I don't know where you've gone, or whether one day you'll ever read these words. I don't need a promise. I don't need an answer. I just want to thank you for listening to me once without interrupting. For seeing me, not as a housekeeper, not as someone who didn't belong, but as a person with a dream. I'll keep moving forward, even without a ticket in my hand. Because if there's one thing I've learned from you, it's this. No one truly loses anything unless they choose to throw it away themselves. Merci pour m'avoir écouté. June." The next morning, she returned to the hotel. No uniform, no name tag, just a stranger. She walked straight to the front desk and handed over the letter. "For Mr. Gabriel Durand, room 1901, she said. "If he's already checked out, please leave it in the mailroom." The receptionist opened their mouth to ask a question, but she was already walking away. Gabriel never replied to that letter, at least not right away. But a few weeks later, while June was working part-time at a small tailoring workshop on the city's edge, a thick envelope arrived with her name on it. No return address, only a single embossed logo on the back, Durand Foundation. Inside was an acceptance letter, a full scholarship to a world-renowned design academy in Paris. June sat in silence for a long time. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. She simply opened her design notebook and for the first time wrote on the final blank page, "A dream isn't a place you arrive. It's something you carry every day, even when you have nothing left in your hands." Then she picked up her pen and redrew the unfinished coat. But this time she added one final detail, stitched into the lining beneath the collar, soft and hidden. Just une rêveuse. Just a dreamer. And this time, she wouldn't apologize for it. 1 year later, the lights of Paris poured down over the streets of Montmartre like golden dust, softening everything they touched. June stood backstage at a spring fashion show, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the final dress in her collection. Still her hands, the same ones that once folded bed sheets, picked up fabric scraps after long cleaning shifts, now adjusting the folds of silk on the first model about to step onto the runway. Behind the curtain, murmured conversations floated in French, heels tapped lightly on the floor, a soft countdown echoed toward 0, all of it forming a soundscape she once only heard through a screen. Now, every detail was real. So real, her heart kept whispering, over and over, "You are really in Paris." She didn't arrive here with a first-class ticket. No one opened a limousine door for her. But every step she took, every sketch she completed, every sleepless night in a cramped room, they all brought her here. No handouts, no miracles, just her and the dream she never let go of. When the collection thread of memory began, the entire room fell silent. The design spoke in the language of old city lines, of faded hues, of a silk scarf passed down from a mother who believed beauty could survive anything. Each dress, each suit, carried the breath of someone who once stood outside, looking in on a world of champagne and chandeliers, but never let shame erase the dream she carried through the door. June stood at the edge of the stage, no heavy makeup, no designer label, just a pale gray silk scarf around her neck. That same worn fabric, now her signature. The scarf that had once been dropped, once picked up, and returned to her by someone who understood the weight of memory. She didn't know if Gabriel was in the audience, didn't know if he ever read her letter, or if he was the one who placed that scholarship in her hands. But it didn't matter like it used to. What mattered more was this. She hadn't given up. And because of that, whether anyone was watching or not, she stood tall, head high. As the applause rose after the final design, June stepped onto the runway, as tradition called for. The Academy director smiled and shook her hand. A writer from a major fashion magazine congratulated her. A discreet investor gave her a quiet nod of approval. But June's eyes landed on the third row, where a man in a gray suit, no tie, sat in silence. He didn't stand, he didn't clap wildly, he didn't smile like the others. But when she met his gaze, everything else faded. It was the same look from all that time ago, cold, deep, and still. But this time, there was no distance, no armor, only recognition. After the show, once everyone had left, June returned to the stage to gather what was left behind. The soft amber lights gave the space a quiet, almost reverent stillness. There was a handwritten letter sitting on a seat in the third row. She recognized the handwriting, plain, unadorned, but familiar. "June, I didn't come here to watch you become something grand. I came to witness how even the most ordinary dream can do something extraordinary. The silk scarf you once dropped. I actually kept it for a few more days after giving it back. Not for any reason. Just to remind myself that sometimes the most beautiful things in this world are the ones everyone else calls insignificant. Today, I didn't see a housekeeper. I saw someone living what they believe in." Gabriel. June folded the letter and slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat. No tears. She didn't need them. Everything she needed had already been written. No decoration, no promises. As she stepped out of the theater, a light rain fell over Paris. She pulled a small umbrella from her bag, opened it, and walked across the Pont Alexandre III. The bridge lights shimmered on the surface of the Seine, stitching gold into every step she took. She stopped at the center, gazing out toward the Eiffel Tower as it blinked in the distance. Paris had once been a destination. Now, it was a beginning. She smiled, pulled her old notebook from her bag. The last page was still blank. She wrote slowly, one line, "Dreams don't have a nationality, only the courage to cross borders." The wind lifted the ends of the silk scarf around her neck, and stitched to the collar of her coat, still unseen, a line Gabriel never knew was there. Juste une rêveuse. Just a dreamer, no longer needing anyone's permission, because now she chose herself. After her debut collection in Paris, June didn't see Gabriel again right away. He disappeared. Again. True to form. It was how he always retreated when emotion edged too close to something he couldn't control. But this time she didn't feel hollow, because she knew if he ever came back, it would be because he wanted to, not because he owed her anything. 3 weeks later, on a soft, rainy afternoon, June was sketching at a small cafe near her design studio when Gabriel walked in. No warning, no message, no dramatic entrance. He simply stood at the doorway, wearing a long gray coat, the kind she once drew on a quiet night in Chicago. "You come here often?" he asked. No smile. But his eyes, unmistakably softer. "Not for the coffee," she replied, "but because it's quiet here." Gabriel pulled out a chair across from her and sat down, then reached into his coat pocket and placed a pain au chocolat on the table. "For that time you said Paris, for you, began with the smell of pastries and rain tapping on glass." June looked up. "You remember that?" He didn't answer, just pushed the pastry toward her and sat quietly, watching her fingers still wrapped around the pen. "I don't know why," he said after a pause, "but everything you've ever said gets stuck in my head. Like every word is a stitch, and I can't unpick them." For the first time, June saw Gabriel not as a CEO, not as the man who'd built a financial empire with cold handshakes and brutal deals. He was just a man sitting in a cafe, trying to hold on to something that was making him softer, but also making him feel alive again. After that day, they began seeing each other again. No schedule, no plans, just small, quiet overlaps, sharing the same metro ride, browsing the same weekend market, standing side by side on a rooftop balcony, watching the Eiffel Tower flicker to life. Gabriel never asked what June was working on, and she never asked why he was still in Paris. There were no promises between them, no expectations, just sunrises, and the quiet knowing that they were still there when night came. And in that stillness, love took root. Gabriel didn't transform overnight. He was still difficult with strangers, still guarded, a man who never let the world peek into his inner rooms. But with June, he was different. He quietly learned to drink mint tea because she hated the bitterness of espresso. He read the entire French novel she once accidentally left in his coat pocket, then underlined every passage she'd annotated like he was reading her between the lines. One day, during a casual talk at the design studio, June shared how she used to sit on the warehouse floor, piecing fabric scraps together by hand. The following week, a large drafting table appeared in the studio. No note, no sender. But she knew. "You always do things like you're afraid someone might catch you being kind," she teased when she saw it. Gabriel gave a quiet smile. "It's not that," he said. "I'm just not used to being kind without having to brace for it." And then there was the day it poured hard. June's scooter broke down in the middle of the street. She called Gabriel, not expecting him to answer. He was in a high-stakes meeting with major investors, but less than 20 minutes later, he showed up. No umbrella, no driver, just wearing a hotel rain poncho, barely shielding him from the downpour. "You left the meeting?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "People don't pull their investments just because I miss one meeting," Gabriel said, holding the car door open for her like it was more valuable than everything he owned. "But if I let you stand in the rain again, you might not come back." June looked at him for a long moment before saying softly, "You used to think feelings made you weak." Gabriel turned to her. "I see it differently now," he said. "Feelings don't make you weak. They just show you the parts of yourself you forgot you dropped." That line stayed with her for life. In the autumn of that year, with yellow leaves covering the steps up to Sacré-Cœur. Gabrielle stood beside June on the balcony of the small apartment they had just rented together. There was no proposal, no ring, no kneeling, just a simple question, one that made her forget to breathe. If you're the dream, how long do I get to live in it? June leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, as long as you remember who stitched the word rêve first. Gabriel held her hand tighter, his eyes stripped of every wall he'd ever built. As the sun rose, its light fell across the silk scarf hanging in a glass frame. It wasn't a keepsake anymore. It was the beginning. And this time, it was real. Some encounters aren't meant to start a love story. They're meant to heal the wounds people have carried for so long. They forgot those wounds were still there. June and Gabriel came from two different worlds. One had spent her life feeling like a quiet shadow in someone else's story. The other had been raised to believe emotion was a weakness that must stay hidden. But when two tired souls stop pretending, stop performing, love, quiet and unannounced, finds its way in. Because in the end, it's not always the person who arrives shining that stays. It's the one willing to pause, bend down, and pick up the old scarf you dropped. And hold on to it like they're holding the part of your memory you've never dared to say out loud. So what about you? Have you ever loved someone? Not because they were perfect, but because they saw the most fragile version of you and didn't walk away? If you've lived a love like that, or you're still waiting for it, drop a comment below. We want to hear your story. And if June and Gabriel's dreams found their way into any corner of your heart, don't forget to subscribe, share the video, and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next emotional journey. Because who knows, the next story might be yours.